She told me she was pregnant the same week I caught her Googling my net worth. That's when I felt it. The shift. Like I just stepped onto ice I didn't know was thin. I'm 45 years old. 2 divorces under my belt. 1 grown son in grad school. And until that week, I honestly thought I'd finally gotten it right. Her name was Rachel. 30, smart, beautiful in the kind of way that makes you ignore your instincts. We'd been together for about a year and a half. She moved into my place around month 11, just after I'd finished renovating the old Craftsman I bought out in Denton. She said she loved the exposed beams and the backyard lemon tree. Said she didn't care about money, just wanted a stable future with a stable man. I believed her. Hell, I wanted to believe her. Then came the pregnancy. She told me on a Monday morning while I was rinsing out the coffee pot. No build-up. No nervous pacing. Just, I'm late. I took a test. It's positive. Her eyes were watery, voice shaky, but not too shaky. I stared at her, blinked, and said the only thing I could. Wow. Okay. Then I hugged her. She cried in my arms. But I didn't feel happy. I felt disoriented. Like the air in the room had changed, and I couldn't put my finger on how. That night, she brought it up again. Not the baby. Marriage. Not to pressure you, she said, curling into me. But I always imagined my child would have a real family. You know, married parents. I didn't answer right away. It wasn't that I didn't care, but something about the timing made my chest tighten. The next morning, I found her laptop open on the kitchen island. Google was still up. Search terms. Texas community property law. Spousal rights after marriage. How much is a small business worth? That's when the first brick fell out of the wall. I didn't say anything. I let her think I hadn't seen it. That became a theme over the next few weeks. Her talking. Me nodding. Her pushing for things. Me playing dumb. I even said yes to looking at rings. But I started paying closer attention. Her moods shifted constantly. She didn't seem excited, not like you'd expect from someone newly pregnant. She didn't talk about cravings or morning sickness. She didn't Google baby names or share ultrasound pics. Because there weren't any. Can I come to your first appointment? I asked one night. She hesitated. They don't allow guests right now. COVID restrictions. It was May 2025. Every OB office I knew had dropped those rules a year ago. Still, I nodded. Makes sense. 1 week later, I came home early and found her in the guest bathroom. The door was half open. She didn't hear me at first. She was holding an unopened pregnancy test box. Not the regular kind, an ovulation tracker. She froze when she saw me in the mirror. I froze too. Neither of us said anything. Then she smiled. Oh, this isn't for me. I bought the wrong one earlier. Just tossing it. I forced a laugh. Pregnancy brain? She laughed back. We both knew we were lying. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. Because I needed to know how far she was willing to go. She started telling friends. Posted on social media. Baby arriving February 2026. With a little onesie photo she ordered off Etsy. The likes came pouring in. She tagged me. I played along. Commented with heart emojis. My phone blew up with congratulations from people I hadn't seen in years. Her parents were thrilled. Her dad, former truck shop owner turned amateur bourbon collector, told me he was proud to have a real man joining the family. I smiled, shook his hand, and said, happy to be here. I was anything but, because by then, I had already quietly dropped by her OB's office to leave a wallet she forgot. Her name wasn't in their system. Not under the name I knew, anyway. I asked if she might have used her maiden name. They checked. Nothing. That night at dinner, she talked about how the baby was the size of a fig and how she was getting a weird craving for jalapeno chips. I smiled and nodded. But something inside me had snapped. Not from anger. Not even from the betrayal. From clarity. This wasn't a mistake. This was a strategy. She wasn't marrying me. She was marrying a bank account. A house. A business she assumed she'd one day be entitled to half of. And she thought she was pulling it off. The wedding was 3 months away. We'd picked a venue in Fort Worth with old oak trees and those Edison string lights she loved. I'd paid the deposit in full. I even bought a suit. She was already calling me daddy. And I was letting her. Because sometimes silence is the loudest move you can make. 2 weeks before the wedding, I found something in her purse that made my skin go cold. And that's when I knew exactly how this was going to end. The moment I tucked that fake ultrasound back into Rachel's purse and zipped it closed like nothing had happened, something inside me clicked into place. It wasn't rage, not even betrayal. It was confirmation. Cold, quiet, clinical confirmation that the woman I almost married was lying to my face every single day. And if she could fake a baby, what else was she willing to fake? It was time to disappear, just enough for her to feel safe, just long enough for her not to see the real plan unfolding behind the curtain. That evening, I came home later than usual. I told her I had a client meeting in Fort Worth that ran long. There was no meeting. I sat in the parking lot of a strip mall for 2 hours, planning the steps I'd take to become invisible. When I walked through the door, she was waiting in the kitchen, barefoot in one of my old college sweatshirts she liked to sleep in, spooning pasta into 2 bowls. "You eat already?" she asked casually. "Ate with the client," I said, hanging up my coat. She blinked. "Oh." I sat at the island while she chewed a few bites alone, watching me out of the corner of her eye. The silence hung heavier than it used to. "You're working a lot lately." I nodded, trying to get ahead before the baby. She forced a smile. "You're sweet." I just watched her, and in that moment, I saw it, something flicker behind her eyes. A flash of doubt. Maybe she was wondering if I'd seen something. Maybe she was just calculating whether she'd pushed the pregnancy lie too far too soon. Either way, the performance had a crack in it now. Over the next 2 weeks, I pulled out of everything that connected me to her life. I canceled wedding vendors behind her back, citing double bookings and timeline shifts. I moved key documents, backups, and client contracts out of the house and into a secure unit I rented downtown. I returned my laptop to factory settings and replaced it with a decoy one filled with fake spreadsheets and open browser tabs about baby stroller comparisons. I stopped posting anything online, deleted my Facebook, locked down my bank profiles, even changed my voicemail to say I was unavailable indefinitely. She didn't notice any of it at first, because she was too busy shining. She threw herself into planning the baby shower, made Pinterest boards, posted mirror selfies of her bump that wasn't there, and took at least a dozen photos of a onesie hanging from the closet door. I watched it all play out from the shadows like a man at his own funeral. But not everything went unnoticed. One afternoon, I came back to find her in my office. She jumped when I opened the door. "I was just looking for stamps," she said too quickly. "I didn't think you'd be home yet. You know there's a drawer in the kitchen with all the mail stuff, right?" I forgot. Her eyes darted toward the filing cabinet. Locked. The key was in my pocket. I didn't press it, just nodded and said, "No problem." But that night, I swapped out the filing cabinet with one from storage that looked identical. Except this one was completely empty. 3 days later, she confronted me again. It was subtle, framed as concern, but I recognized the edge behind it. "You've been distant," she said while folding laundry. Like, emotionally. I didn't look up from my phone. "Just tired. Are you having doubts?" I finally looked at her. "Are you?" She didn't answer. Just turned back to folding shirts that weren't hers. The silence between us that night was thick with things we weren't saying. Then came the turning point. Drew showed up. My son from my first marriage. 22, sharp-eyed, good-natured, and about 10 times more perceptive than Rachel ever gave him credit for. He walked in like he owned the place, threw his duffel on the couch, and gave me a hug. "Rachel told me you've been working like crazy. Everything good?" "Everything's fine," I said, pouring us both a drink. Rachel came down a few minutes later, smiling too brightly. "Drew, you want to see the nursery stuff?" He shrugged politely. "Sure." She led him upstairs and started pointing out fabrics, color samples, crib options. I stayed in the kitchen. When Drew came back down alone 10 minutes later, he leaned on the counter and looked at me in a way that told me he'd seen something. "She said she's almost in her second trimester," he said quietly. I didn't respond. He glanced upstairs, then back at me. "She's not showing, Dad." Still, I said nothing. Drew studied me a second longer. "Look, I didn't want to say anything before, but she gives me the creeps. Like something about the way she smiles when no one's looking. It's off." That landed harder than I expected. My son had picked up on something even I didn't verbalize. That smile, that precision, the rehearsed warmth. You said once, he continued, that predators don't always hunt with teeth. Sometimes they come smiling with open hands. I looked him in the eye. You remember that? I've never forgotten it. We didn't say anything else about it. But when he left the next morning, he hugged me longer than usual. I'm around if you need anything, he said. Anything. I knew exactly what he meant. Midway through the following week, Rachel made a mistake. She called her sister on speakerphone and forgot I was in the next room. I think he's pulling away, she whispered. He used to be more affectionate, now he's quiet. Not suspicious, but just weird. Distant. Her sister said something muffled. No, Rachel continued. He hasn't said anything. But he canceled the tux fitting. Said he wanted a different cut. That doesn't sound like him. Another pause. I don't know, Rachel said. He's not looking at baby stuff anymore either. I sent him 3 cribs, and he just said, whatever you want. Like, he doesn't care. Then came the line that set my jaw. If he backs out, I'll lose everything. She didn't know I was standing on the other side of the wall, still as a shadow, listening to her fall apart in real time. The next morning, she was chipper again, overcorrecting. She brought me coffee in bed, rubbed my back, wore the robe she used to wear when we first started dating. She even suggested a weekend trip before things get too crazy with the baby. That was when I knew she was starting to panic. Not visibly, not fully, but deep inside, she could feel the tremors. And the best part? She didn't know what part of the foundation was cracking. A few nights later, I came home late on purpose. She was sitting on the couch, arms folded. You didn't text me all day. I shrugged, kicked off my shoes. Busy. You said you'd be back by 7. It's 9. Not a crime. She stared at me. I'm trying to plan a life here, she said. A family. I need to know where you are. I sat on the opposite end of the couch. Then ask. She blinked. What? Ask what you really want to know. She hesitated. Are you having second thoughts? I didn't answer immediately. I let the pause grow teeth. Then I said, no. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. And for the first time, I saw it. The fear. She wasn't just worried I'd found out. She was worried she'd overplayed her hand, and I was letting her build the trap around herself. Because I was. The wedding was 4 days away now. Her sister was flying in. The cake had supposedly been confirmed. The dress was hanging in our closet, still in its garment bag. She didn't know the guest list had already been altered. She didn't know the pastor had been quietly replaced. And she definitely didn't know what I had planned for the rehearsal dinner. The night before the rehearsal dinner, Rachel walked into the bedroom, holding her phone like it was radioactive. She didn't speak right away, just stood in the doorway in her robe, screen lit against her face, teeth clenched like she was deciding whether to explode or stay composed. I was already in bed, pretending to scroll through emails, when she finally broke the silence. Why did the florist email me saying we changed venues? I looked up slowly, like her voice hadn't just tried to pin me to the wall. I don't know, I said, like I actually didn't. Maybe a mix-up? You sure it was from our florist? She walked to the side of the bed and turned her phone so I could see the screen. I double-checked. That's the same woman I've been dealing with. She said someone named Tom from your office confirmed a venue switch. That's weird, I said, letting the tension roll off me like fog on a windshield. I don't know any Tom. Rachel narrowed her eyes, studied me for just a second too long, then said, You've been really scattered lately. I nodded, unbothered. Yeah, work's been a wreck. She didn't reply, just stood there holding her phone like it had betrayed her. Then she said, Did you cancel the rehearsal dinner? I kept my gaze neutral. What makes you ask that? Because the catering company never showed up for the walkthrough, and Michelle said the manager looked confused when she showed up this morning. I got a call from the venue, I said calmly. Plumbing issues. Told them we'd adjust. You didn't tell me. I set my phone down on the nightstand and folded my hands in my lap like a father sitting down for a difficult conversation. I didn't want to stress you out. You've been dealing with a lot lately. That line landed wrong. I saw it in her face. Her neck stiffened, her lips parted like she wanted to say something, But instead she pivoted and walked to her side of the bed. She didn't say goodnight, just slid under the covers in silence. That was the first rupture. The first time she didn't try to wrap it up with a smile. The next morning, things escalated. I watched her from the upstairs hallway while she stood in the kitchen whispering into her phone. She was pacing in slow circles by the sink, rubbing her temple, mouthing the words "calm down" to whoever was on the line. I didn't interrupt. I just walked back into the bathroom and ran the shower loud enough for her to think I hadn't heard a word. 10 minutes later, she knocked softly. "Babe?" she said, her voice tight like someone suppressing a scream. "Do you know anything about an email that went out to the wedding guests?" I stepped out with a towel around my waist and blinked like she'd just switched topics mid-conversation. "What email?" "Apparently. I don't know. Someone sent an update about the ceremony. Different time. Different program. It's not for me." "Did it say who sent it?" "No, just a Gmail address. But it had the guest list." "My list." I kept my tone flat. "Weird. Could it be your cousin, trying to help?" "She wouldn't do that without asking." I shrugged. People get overexcited. She didn't believe me. I could see it clearly now. Her eyes weren't suspicious anymore. They were scared. She didn't just suspect I knew something. She was starting to believe I'd done something. But she couldn't prove it. And more importantly, she couldn't admit what she was afraid I'd found out, because to admit that would mean revealing her lie. By noon, she was spiraling. Michelle came by to check on things, and Rachel pulled her upstairs almost immediately. I stayed downstairs pretending to work, but I heard everything. The voices were muffled at first, then sharper, like knives being unsheathed in slow motion. "He's off," Rachel hissed. "He's too calm." "You think he knows?" "I don't know. But he's canceling things behind my back. He's changing vendors, lying about timelines." Michelle interrupted, whispering something I couldn't hear. "No," Rachel snapped. "It's not cold feet. It's something else." There was a pause. Then Rachel said, "He left a picture in his truck." That stopped me. I don't know if it was meant for me to find, but it was me. At the cafe. Alone. He took it. Michelle didn't say anything for a beat. Then, in a voice that was trying to stay neutral, she said, "Rachel, if there's something you haven't told me, I haven't done anything." Michelle was quiet again. I moved back to the kitchen and opened the fridge loud enough to give them warning. The next time I saw them, they were smiling again, tight, plastic, practice smiles. Michelle asked me about the weather. Rachel offered to make lunch. It was all pretend. That night, she tried one last move. We were sitting in the living room, barely speaking, the TV on, but nothing being watched. Then, without any lead-in, she leaned forward and said, "Do you still want this wedding to happen?" I turned my head slowly, as if I'd only just noticed her sitting there. What kind of question is that? She didn't blink. A real one. "Of course I want this." She held eye contact. "Then tell me the truth." "What truth?" She licked her lips. "Did you cancel the guest list?" "What?" "I got a message from my cousin saying her invite was marked invalid. That she got an email saying the ceremony was now private and she wasn't cleared." "I didn't send that." She exhaled hard. "Then someone did. Maybe the planner?" I checked with her. She said she hasn't touched anything in days. I kept my posture loose. "Sounds like a tech glitch." She leaned closer. "If you don't want to marry me, just say it." That was it. That was the moment. The accusation buried under a dare. But I wasn't going to give her what she wanted. Not yet. I stood up slowly and said, "We've both put too much into this to back out now." Then I walked out of the room and left her sitting there, staring at nothing. The next day was the wedding. Guests began arriving at the venue mid-afternoon. White chairs, pastel flower arrangements, the air thick with small talk and suspicion. Many of the attendees weren't her friends. They were mine. A few were total strangers to her, but she couldn't say anything without sounding insane. The playlist wasn't hers either. I'd swapped it. Nothing obvious. Just the tone. Cold. Nostalgic. Minor keys and hollow strings. Rachel showed up in the dressing room with her makeup half done and her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. I watched her talk to one of the makeup artists from the cracked door of the groom's suite. She was trying to hold it together, trying to keep her voice light. But the cracks had spidered across the whole performance now. That morning, she'd found the envelope I left on the dining room table. Unmarked, sealed, plain. It wasn't addressed to her. It was just there. Inside was a folded piece of paper. On it, a single printed screenshot. A message, sent from her phone, to someone she thought I'd never find. It read, "He doesn't suspect anything. Once the wedding is done, it's just a matter of time." She hadn't confronted me about it, because there was no way to explain it away, not without saying more than she wanted to. And now she had to stand in front of my family, our friends, most of whom weren't even who she thought they were, and smile like she was walking into the best day of her life. She thought she was walking into a wedding, but the slideshow on the projector had changed. The officiant wasn't the one she chose, and the first speaker wasn't either of us. It was someone else entirely, someone she forgot, someone who remembered everything. It all came down in under 4 minutes. First came the slideshow. Rachel was halfway down the aisle when the projector behind the altar hummed to life. She slowed. The screen flickered. Then, photos of us, laughing at the lake, holding hands, her with fake bump padding under a sweater. At first, it looked like any wedding montage. But the room went quiet when the music faded, and a voice cut through the silence. Drew's voice. Sometimes the truth waits, and sometimes it walks right down the aisle. Then the next slide hit. A screenshot of her OB clinic's database. No appointment, no patient record. Next slide. Rachel messaging her friend. "He's finally proposing. I didn't even need to try the second test." Murmurs broke out in the crowd. Her dad shifted in his seat. Her sister leaned forward. Rachel stopped walking completely. Then came the voice memo. Her voice, recorded in that cafe weeks ago. "I just need the wedding to go through. Once the prenup clears and I'm legally on the books, I can figure out how to phase out the lie." Someone audibly gasped. Michelle turned to her, eyes wide. Her dad stood up halfway. The officiant, whom Rachel didn't recognize because she wasn't a church official at all, but my estate's lead counsel, stepped back from the altar and let the footage run. She dropped her bouquet. The stems hit the floor with a dull smack. "You did this," Rachel said, her voice brittle. "You planned this whole thing." I didn't move. I didn't smile. I just looked at her and said, "You planned the lie. I just made sure there was a stage." She looked around. Guests stared. A few people raised phones. She turned to me again, desperate now. "I was going to stop," she said. "Once everything was signed, I was going to come clean. It wasn't supposed to go this far." I raised an eyebrow. "The part where you get caught? Or the part where I finally get tired of pretending?" "I just wanted to be secure," she hissed. "I didn't grow up like you. I didn't have the safety net. She caught herself. "You're rich. You wouldn't understand." That's when it happened. A slow clap from the back of the room. One of the guests, my accountant, seated next to my trust manager, stood and said, just loud enough for the room to hear, "She should have read the prenup." More laughter followed. Tight. Uneasy. Rachel turned to me, face flushed. "You bastard. This was never about love for you." I tilted my head just slightly. "You Googled my net worth before you ever met my son. I think that tells us everything." "I did love you." "No. You loved the lifestyle. You just wanted the paperwork to match." She stepped forward, now angry and unraveling. "You think you win? You think this makes you the good guy?" "I'm not the good guy," I said quietly. "I'm just not your fool." The officiant cleared her throat, then nodded toward the projector. The final slide clicked into place. A simple line of text: "The wedding is canceled, but the footage is archived." Rachel stared at the screen like it had slapped her. She turned to her father. He looked away. Michelle stood and walked out without a word. The officiant gestured toward the back. The camera crew, hired under the name of a wedding documentary team, began quietly packing their gear. And just like that, it was over. I turned and walked down the aisle alone, guests parting for me, whispers trailing like smoke behind me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain. I didn't even glance back to see if she followed, because I knew she wouldn't. The next morning, I forwarded the full video to her father. No caption, no note, just the footage. That afternoon, she was locked out of the shared calendar the shared bank, and the wedding website. Her name never made it onto the property title. The estate trust? Untouched. My business? Still protected under a holding company formed 6 months earlier, quietly buried behind 2 shell LLCs and a lawyer in Tampa whose only job was to smile and file. The guests she'd invited never got real invitations, just placebos sent through a dummy site. The only people who received confirmed times and locations were mine, and half of them weren't there for love. They were there for liability. The flowers were fake. The vows were fake. But the camera? That was very real. The clips circulated in small circles first. A private link. A quiet warning. A cautionary tale. Nothing public. Nothing viral. But just enough to end her credibility. Rachel never tried to contact me again. She packed up her things 2 days later. Left her key on the counter. Didn't take the engagement ring. I didn't stop her. 2 weeks after, Drew came over. We sat on the back porch with beers, watching the light disappear behind the trees. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. But after a while, he asked, "You ever think she really cared? At least a little?" I finished my drink before answering. "She cared about being safe," I said. "She just didn't care who paid for it." He nodded, quiet. Then he said, "That slideshow was brutal." I shrugged. She made the lie public. I figured the truth deserved the same treatment. "You planned it all." I looked at him. "I never needed to scream," I said. "I just needed her to be holding the mic when it all came down." He leaned back in his chair and whistled low. "That's messed up." "Maybe," I said. "But it's finished." He grinned. "She came for a husband." I grinned back. "She left with an audience."